And you have to wonder if it's really a compliment or something else. That's the.
Well, you told us the other day we weren't supposed to gossip about people. And me and him have so much trouble not talking about Eddie. Because it's so much fun. So now we have to talk about one another. We can't
Okay.
talk about Eddie too much. We're cutting down on that a little bit.
That's a good substitute. That's a good substitute because we all get to participate and enjoy the process of letting it go and letting it happen. I know it's entertaining for me. If you have a Bible and you like following along, please turn in it to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. This is where we're going to spend our time. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I love Ecclesiastes. And one of the reasons I like it is it's real. It's really real. It's so different from the rest of the Bible in the way in which it's narrated. Solomon is giving us a glimpse, a real good one, of what life is if God either doesn't, firstly, that if he doesn't exist. That's the first glimpse he's giving us. And the second one is what life really is if a person simply doesn't believe in God and has no relationship with him. I mean, without God's constant correction, who of us would be able to find anything in this life that had any meaning whatsoever? I don't see how. I mean, our life's work, whatever we choose to do. I think we were talking about the graduates just a minute ago, and I think about these kids. Imagine, put yourself in that spot again. You're 18, you're 22, 24, 25, and you've got to decide to enter into something, and that's what you're going to do. That's what your life's going to be. Man, what a weighty decision. And yet, if there's no God, it doesn't matter what you do, what any of us does. I think, this is just my personal view, and comes from the people with whom I correspond. I don't think, and Christians as well, I don't think we grasp the importance of what it means to say that God exists, and secondly, what it means to say that we believe in him and have a relationship with him. I would hope that somehow in our lives, and this goes back to something that Tina mentioned in Sunday school, that something in our lives would attract people to the difference that God makes in us, so that they would be attracted to that and say, what's going on with you? With all that in mind, let's take a look at the text. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'll begin reading in verse 1. And I'm going to skip a spot when we get to a spot, and I'll try to alert you to that. Solomon says, so I reflected on all of this. Now, what he's reflecting on is everything he's been talking about in the previous 8 chapters, and I would encourage everybody to take that in because it's an amazing book to me. Attempting to clear it all up, I concluded that the righteous and the wise, as well as their works, are in God's hands. Whether a person will be loved or hated, no one knows what lies ahead. Everyone shares the same fate. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the ceremonially clean and the ceremonially unclean. Those who offer sacrifices, those who do not. What happens to the good person also happens to the sinner. What happens to those who make vows also happens to those who are afraid to make vows. This is the unfortunate fact about everything that happens on the earth. The same fate awaits everyone. In addition to this, the hearts of all the people are evil. And there's folly in their hearts all of their lives, and then they die. But whoever is among the living has hope. A live dog is better than a dead lion. The living know they will die, but the dead don't know anything. They have no further reward. Even the memory of them disappears. What they loved as well as what they hated and envied perished long ago, and they no longer have any part in anything that happens on the earth. So, go eat your food with joy. Drink your wine with a happy heart, because God has already approved your works. Let your clothes always be clean and white. Don't spare precious ointment for your head. Enjoy your life with your beloved wife or husband during all the days of your fleeting life that God has given you on the earth, during all your fleeting days, for that is your reward in life and in your burdensome work here on the earth. Whatever you find to do with your hands, do it with all your might, because there's neither work nor planning nor knowledge nor wisdom in the grave, the place where you and we will all eventually go. And then in chapter 10, he makes this one statement. I want to conclude with this one in the reading. One dead fly makes the perfumer's ointment give off a rancid stench, so a little folly can outweigh much wisdom. Now, I don't know about you, but this to me is a perfect commentary on the emptiness of life apart from a life lived in relationship with God. Think about what it means if for a human being, for any of us in this room, if there's no offer of immortality. Think about that for just a minute, the ramifications. And I assure you that is the predominant view in this culture right now. There's no immortality. 29 times Solomon says in the book of Ecclesiastes, under the sun. What he means by that is he's establishing the parameters for what he's trying to describe. That is, it happens here on the earth and that's it. That's all. Think about it. No justice is possible without immortality. None. Nor is there human worth without immortality, except what we say is human worth. So Chairman Mao can decide that your only worth is your worth relative to what you can contribute to the state. And if you're not worth anything to the state, you're not worth anything at all. Hitler did the same, the exact same thing. If you're a Nazi and sympathetic to Nazis, you're an Aryan, you have worth. If you don't, if you're not, you don't. And that's the end of it. Now, I'm going to say, if there's no God, they're right. Those are correct assessments. So what Solomon is going to do here in this book, and I encourage everybody to read Ecclesiastes, he's going to probe for all the wisdom he can find relative to being unaided by God. How can I discover what this world offers me? And I'll tell you, notice in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon doesn't mention Scripture, he doesn't mention Moses, he doesn't mention Revelation, and he doesn't mention a prophet. Solomon didn't have a prophet in his court, so far as we can tell from the Bible. So he's making what, I'll use a 50-cent word, he's making the empiricist's mistake. What does that mean? That means he is taking in what he can gather from the 5 nodes of information we all have, the 5 senses that we possess. And those 5 senses feed into our brains. We're talking now as somebody who doesn't think God exists. The brain then processes it, and as Pink Floyd said, everything we have ever experienced becomes what we are. And then it dies with us when we leave this world. So in his mind, what he's describing is what I would call a 2-doorway life. A doorway in and a doorway out, and that's it. That's exactly what he's describing. So where's meaning in any of this? How does anything mean anything? Now, we can find small meanings, like the nice breakfast we had this morning, or a nice song like we just sang, or a family gathering, or perhaps a nice evening spent with our wife or our husband or our family. And those little meanings continue along until finally we just come to the end of them and they die, like the New York City cab driver said, work, eat, sleep, and then comes the weekend. And Monday morning just start all over again with the same thing, and that's the end of it. What else is there, would be the question to ask. Think about it like this. The most successful, fulfilled as far as we can see, person on the planet, and I guess in our culture we would equate that with people who are very wealthy, movie stars, great athletes, people of great artistic ability, politicians, I don't know, you pick it, whatever that holds true for you in your particular assessment. For the most successful, Solomon is saying, well, you can think that, but in the end, we all have the same fate. We're all going to die. And so what happens to us? If you take God out of this picture, what happens? You get in what I would call the if I only had syndrome of thinking about life. If I only had X, I would be happy. Life would be fulfilling. Well, people have been putting that car on the road for a long time, and it hasn't worked out for anybody yet because, as Solomon says, the same fate awaits all of us. Solomon This is why I am so convinced that God put Solomon on the earth, partially, is because of this book. Because what he's telling us is, I had given to me by God the opportunity to try everything within the limits of who I was. In other words, for Solomon in his time and his culture, there were no limits. He could try whatever he wanted, and obviously he did. 300 wives and 700 concubines later, he was still trying everything he wanted to try with no fetters. God didn't eliminate his ability to try these things. He was doing what all humanity does. He was looking for the more that nobody can find here on this earth. Nobody. And then he goes even further, and this is why I close with that last statement with regard to a one fly spoils all the ointment. He's saying, look, evil can strip away all of the good that there is here on the earth. And he's right about that. I want to give you a philosophical conundrum. It's just interesting the way this is stated, and this is not me. This is, let's see, 2,350 years old, so you can think about it as something that's hung around with us for a long time. People still believe this way. Think about this for just a moment. If God exists, he would will all good. I think that's true. And he's all powerful. But then that would follow that then therefore evil shouldn't exist. Secondly, if God exists and wills only good, but evil does exist, God is being thwarted. Therefore, he's not all powerful. If God exists and is all powerful, and evil exists alongside God, thus God must be willing that evil would be. Therefore, he's not all good. If God means a being who is all powerful and all good, and evil exists, then God does not. Now think about that statement for just a minute. And you can see why so many in our culture today believe this way. This is the argument. What is Solomon's problem here? The problem for Solomon is mortality is an evil. Suffering is an evil. Therefore, since we're here, life doesn't mean anything at all. If you take God out of the picture, life means nothing. If we're all to disappear with death, think for just a moment and answer this question within your own mind. If we're all just to disappear with death, what's the point of any of it? I mean, after all, if there's no God, okay, the universe just is, as Bertrand Russell said. There it is. It's just there. We're just here. And it's like we know scientifically that the universe is going to come to an end, right? We think so. We think, well, it's just going to keep spreading out. It's expanding faster and faster and faster. And when it expands far enough, things will be so far apart there won't even be any light or heat or anything else. If we were around then, we'd look up at the sky and see nothing because everything would be too far away. The light couldn't even get here anymore. So what does it matter that the whole of the human race ever existed at all in a universe like that? I don't see how it matters at all. Here's something that happened to me when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was going to my grandmother's house. And this is back when a 7 or 8 year old could walk someplace 3 or 4 blocks without you didn't have to be concerned. Mom, I'm going to grandma's house. Fine, you go. So I was walking there, and it was about this time of the year. I was out of school, and I came to a spot on the corner, I can tell you where it was, of Richmond and Cherokee. And it had rained a lot that year. And there was this puddle around the curb where the pavement stood up a little higher than the curb portion, and then the curb itself blocked the water off, and the water was just standing there, and it was boiling with tadpoles. Just filled with tadpoles. And I thought, wow, look at that. I came back you know how it is here in the South. If you have 1 week without rain, all that dries up. Water just disappears. And I came back about several days later, and there were only a few little tadpoles in the mud wiggling their last bits of wiggle as the birds were eating them. That is the picture of life that most people have. They were doing their tadpole thing in the water, becoming frogs. They're not thinking about it, they're just doing it, like us, if there's no God. and then they became food for something else. And then that food, that being that eats them will be eaten by something else, and then finally the whole universe disappears and none of it matters anyway. Then Solomon adds this bit about the ointment and the fly. And what's he telling us? He's telling us that good is so fragile and so delicate and so easily damaged. And he's making the contrast here. Think about it like this. Evil is powerful and loud and destructive. But good is very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. It's defenseless and it's delicate. It's the ointment. Think about just today things that happen in our culture. You go into a museum and you see this painting that some master worked on for 5 years, right? Painted this painting for 5 years. That was their whole life's work. There it is. And some ethno-protester comes in and paints their hands and slaps the paint onto the master's work. All of that good is destroyed in an instant. That's how evil is. It destroys good so readily, so quickly. For evil to succeed, all it takes is one loss of vigilance with good, and evil succeeds. One fly spoils the whole barrel of ointment. Contrast that with the picture that God gives to you and to me. And this is why I'm saying for you and me, as followers of Jesus, we've got so much more going for us than somebody who doesn't believe. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, leading us in a world filled with evil. And yet, he leads us through it. Think about it in the terms of, there was a guy that took a bus tour to Palestine, to the Holy Land. Shouldn't call it Palestine, but that's the Roman name for it. Anyway, to Israel. And he was talking about shepherds leading people. They were out in the hinterlands where people were still leading sheep, and this was still taking place. And then he came into town, and there was a guy with a sheep on the end of a rope just dragging it. And he just spent all this time talking about the gentle good shepherd, how Jesus is going to lead us through this evil world. So he went up to the guy and he said, "What's going on here? I thought that the sheep would follow the shepherd." The guy says, "I'm not the shepherd, I'm the butcher." Right? So you have this picture of just the contrast. If God doesn't exist, nothing of anything we think about, do, say, love, hate, just as Solomon says, means anything, because it's all going to die with us. A friend of mine who's a believer, we were talking about this one evening, and he said, "Rip, it strikes me as so incredible." He said, I'm here, my children know me, and if they have children, their children may know me, some of them, but their children's children may not, any of them, even know who I was, and in another generation, it'll be as though I was never here. He's right about that. He's right about that. You and I are here now. Think of the millions of people who have lived before us that we don't know anything about. We look at the Bible's pages, we read about the names of people in the Bible that are significant, but there were thousands of people all around them that we don't know anything about. They're gone. If there's no immortality, nothing of their lives mattered at all. What's the answer to God that God gives to us from this? He says, look, you are immortal. You are immortal. I am immortal. And justice is real. Mercy is offered. But God doesn't set justice aside in order to offer it. No. He takes the justice and gives it to Jesus on the cross. Jesus satisfies the justice that all of us deserve. And we say things like in the church, well, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. I don't think we're really capable of that fully. But God can separate those two things. He separates them at the cross. Sin is punished fully at the cross, completely, and justice is satisfied. And Jesus, by the way, knows something of this world that none of us have ever known, nor has any other human being. That is what it is to be in a universe where God is not. Why have you forsaken me? For him, God was gone. Even the most rank unbeliever has no idea what it's like to live in a universe where God is not. Jesus knows what that feels like. He gives Jesus the punishment, and we receive the gift of the mercy. The sin and the sinner become separated in God's view. Salvation was accomplished on the cross objectively in the universe, and all we have to do is reach out and ask for it. Repent and believe. We are not just the tadpoles in the drying puddle. We're not. And that is so awesome. Everything in your life and mine has meaning. The most insignificant efforts that we make in this world have real meaning. Everything means something. We're not just here to live and die. I love that. And that goes all the way back to where I started. You and I have something going for us that is far beyond what anybody else has. We know that life really does have meaning. We're not just going to leave this world and that's it. We're going to leave this world because we're made for another one. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything, you got a question for me.